So on this panel I'm going to draw a scroll, or paint a scroll, and show the different stages involved with scrollwork production. So I'm just going to draw the top and bottom line where I want the scroll to sit, just roughly as a guide, allowing for a shadow to ensure that the scroll sort of stands off the page or jumps off the sign effectively. Scrollwork is traditionally used for infill or additional details on fairground rides, signage, pub signs, etc, etc. And a lot of it stems from early periods of art. The most important thing to remember with scrollwork is that it should flow, the shapes that you're creating, and you should keep an eye on the negative space as well as the positive space. So I'm very quickly copying this drawing I did earlier. And I'll neaten this up with the paintbrush. So I'm working with flamboyant fairground art styles, such as those seen by Fred Fowle, etc. And so I'm starting the painting aspect of the scroll by adding the silver base. And by doing this you can then add flamboyant colour on top and also shadows, which I will do underneath in a block colour by eye. You can also use a sort of trick of cardboard or something, but I'm just going to do them by eye. For me, the way that I learnt scrollwork was looking at previous examples of scrolls and fairground artists or scroll artists and how they formed the shapes, the flowingness, the curves, the points, and of course the negative space. Often the scrollwork responds to the space that it's being fitted into. So these curves or lines that cut the body of the scroll will be added as details when I outline it later in the process. So effectively I'm just creating a base layer at the moment, which will become clearer, the details and the flourishes will become clearer when the details of the paint are added. And you can see how I'm using the point of the brush to get the fine points of the scroll. So now I'm adding a flamboyant layer to the silver base, flamboyant amber this is, and this kind of paint can only be used on this silver base, and it's great because it's used quite often in fairground art, and you can add things on top of it such as black lines, highlights with block colouring, and it gives a nice sort of this is what gives the fairground art the flamboyant element. It's almost like your second coating, just with a different kind of paint. This is quite a thick flamboyant, often they're quite translucent. Possibly could have watered it down with varnish, but I quite like the solid effect. I'm not being too careful on the edges because I'm going to put the outline on them, So I don't need to worry too much. That will sort of neaten it up. And really I'm focusing on the brush strokes. So trying to get as much of the scroll covered within the brush stroke to ensure the smooth finish. Okay, so now I'm going to demonstrate how you can pick out those little details in your scroll with adding outlines, or adding a black outline. I'm working slightly wet on wet, which is not ideal, and so the brush possibly won't respond in the way that I'd like it to, but we'll see. And then you just finish with the point when the shadow goes on in a moment. The point is to try to keep the same thickness throughout the outlines, aside from when you're working towards points in the curves and the flourishes. I'm just adding a bit of white spirit to the paint to ensure it flows well. And then to finish the outlining, I'm just going to join up this little point. So I'm now just going to add some flourishes in the base of a shadow to the scroll, just to show you the possibilities of adding detail. And this is just done with your brush stroke like this. Again, it's working slightly wet on wet, so it's not as ideal as if you're doing the scroll over a period of time, but you'll get the idea. You can go quite far with this. You could use a brown or an amber to imitate the shadow of the flamboyant amber that's used as the base coat, or you can use a contrasting colour like red to really pick out the details. And again, you just take it to the point. I'm just doing the same again here, highlighting this little curve. Flourish of the scroll. Trying to keep that distance between the black line and the red the same, so you see the same amount of amber. So the final stage is the shadow, and again you just use the point of the brush, and I like to keep a little bit of a gap between the outline and the shadow, just to give that definition and make it feel like it's jumping off the page. And there's a bit of artistic license here. You just think about where the sun is and the shadow that it would be producing. You can vary the width of the shadow dependent on the size of the scroll, and thinking about proportion and how much emphasis you want to put on the shadow. And you could also add a little black or a darker green to give that feeling of light, which I will show in a minute. So if I mix a bit of black in to make it a bit darker, you can then just use the paintbrush and go over what you've painted, and it will slowly go from light to dark. And if you notice, I'm coming up to the base line that I drew earlier is where my shadow starts, and then getting thicker as I come around that curve, as if where the light is affecting the depth of the shadow. And again, you can then play with the darkness of the green in this instance to show where the light's coming from,